My name is Shameen Prashantham. I'm Professor of International Business and Strategy at China Europe International Business School. Mine is the perspective of an academic who's been studying corporate startup partnering for the past 15 years. And two of the finest corporate innovators that I came across in the course of my research are my fellow panelists, and I'm so grateful that they're willing to spare the time. Sheelpa Patel set up the one of the first, if not the first, corporate accelerators for an automotive company in Hong Kong, primarily focusing on Nissan's luxury car brand Infiniti, setting up Infiniti Labs, but working across the entire Renault, Mitsubishi, Nissan alliance. Sheelpa, do you want to come in very quickly and say a quick hello to everyone?
Sure. Thank you, Shameen, and pleasure to be here with you all today. As Shameen mentioned, I headed up Infiniti Lab based out of Hong Kong, which was a smart cities and IoT accelerator program. The objective of the program was to bring startups from all around the world to collaborate with Infiniti and the broader Nissan alliance around the problems that were facing, the automotive industry at the time around developing more connected car solutions, autonomous solutions, etc. And what began as a pilot in Hong Kong grew into a global program for business transformation with several tangible business outcomes. And I'd love to talk to you today about some of my experiences.
Super, thank you. Sheelpa is CEO of Mavens and Mavericks now and has taken her knowledge now to a wider group of corporations. My other co-panelist is Tzahi Weisfeld from Intel, as you can see in the background of his screen when he comes on, but I really knew him as the pioneer behind the Microsoft Accelerator program, which started in Israel and was then launched globally, which he headed. Tzahi, do you want to come in and say a quick 10-second hello to everyone?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. And thank you, Shameen, for inviting. As Shameen mentioned, well, first of all, I still see myself as an entrepreneur for the past 30 years, built companies around the world, but also been a corporate entrepreneur. I used to run Microsoft for startups. I left Microsoft after 3 times. It's been doing that again and again, but last position there, I built the Microsoft Accelerator program and managed Microsoft for startups, and now doing similarly, connecting Intel to startups around the world. So great, happy to be here and can't wait for a discussion.
Super, thank you very much. So what I'll do is to now give everyone just a very quick overview of what I've learned through this 15 years of research before inviting Sheelpa and Tzahi to make a few opening remarks, and then we'll hand it back to Olivia to moderate the Q&A. And in fact, this work is now articulated, consolidated into a book called Gorillas Can Dance, Lessons from Microsoft and Other Corporations on Partnering with Startups. And as you can see from the subtitle, Microsoft is the lead company, the lead case study, but I have cases from many different industries. And what was interesting was that I got a chance to observe how things unfolded in Microsoft, starting with the work of Daniel Lewin in Silicon Valley. He, as a young man, worked with Steve Jobs in Apple, was part of the Macintosh team, and I think very instrumental in pointing the way to Silicon Valley for Microsoft. But then the work that came out of Israel, led by Tzahi, played a very prominent role in many ways, I think, including helping Microsoft understand different interfaces and formats to engage with startups, also giving Microsoft a much more global perspective, because when Tzahi set up the accelerator in Tel Aviv, this also led to then accelerators being opened in Bangalore and Beijing, and he managed the global program, and then there were several other locations in Europe and the US thereafter. And I think as Tzahi was leaving, there was one set up in Sydney as well, and you will hear more from Tzahi. And what's also very interesting about Tzahi is that he's taken this expertise into Intel and is doing that for Intel as well, setting up accelerators in Tel Aviv, Munich, and Austin, Texas. This is James Chaw, who runs Microsoft for Startups here in China. And just before the pandemic, when Doug McMillan of Walmart came to China, he was exposed to some startup partners that Walmart were working with in China. I know this because I was brought in as an external expert to make a few comments at the start. And the startups he was working with were alumni of the Microsoft startup accelerator in China. And here's Satya Nadella himself saying, Microsoft loves startups. And so it's a very interesting story, which shows that even gorillas like Microsoft could learn to dance with startups, and points to the importance of the why, the how, and the where, which is the way I have structured the book. Now, for an audience like this, I think the why is extremely clear. There is need for big companies to be more entrepreneurial as they face disruptions. And there's an opportunity to engage with startups because of the complementary capabilities that large companies and startups have. And each has something that the other wants: scale on the one side, agility on the other. However, if it was that easy, we wouldn't need the session. And what I've discovered from my research is that the challenge around partnering between corporates and startups comes down to what I think of as a paradox of asymmetry. The very differences that make corporations and startups attractive to each other, the huge differences actually make it difficult, or at least not straightforward, to partner with each other. And what I've noticed in a range of companies in different industries across different geographies is that they seem to have paid attention to these asymmetries of goals, the big companies and startups wanting different things at different timescales, the asymmetry of structure, the difficulty of finding role counterparts, for example, and what I call the asymmetry of attention, which is that big companies see an ocean of startups out there and aren't sure which startups are worthy of their limited managerial attention. Startups have a different problem. They know who the big companies are, but struggle to attract the attention of the key people who matter, and in many cases have wasted months trying to find who the right person to speak to is. And of course, the crux of the book and what we're all interested in is, of course, the how. And I find two aspects to this. One is partnering with startups systematically to address these asymmetries, but also trying to embed a new capability of partnering with startups. And there are three elements that I've noticed across different companies. The first is clarifying synergies, which sounds blindingly obvious, but is actually not always very clear. What is exactly the win for both sides? And then secondly, the creation of interfaces. So who's your port of call if you're a startup trying to engage with a big company? And both Zach and Sheelpa are pioneers in this area, having set up interfaces in Microsoft and Intel in Zach's case, and the Infinity Labs in Sheelpa's case. And she's also now helping many other companies with such interests. And also cultivating exemplars, success stories, quite intentionally, so that it becomes clear to both parties what success can look like. Not only is this useful in attracting other high-quality startups, but it also has a very important role internally, because you have skeptical internal audiences. The people at the interfaces are incentivized to talk to startups, but meaningful opportunities accrue, as this audience knows very well, only when business unit managers are willing to engage with startups, and many of them are risk averse. But when you see success stories, you're more likely to be able to engage with startups. And some of the examples that I talk about in this book to illustrate different types of synergy, different types of interface. On the synergy side, you typically find the technology companies focusing on a building block type synergy, meaning they have underlying technologies, they want startups to build on top of this, and then they could explore co-sell possibilities, for example. Whereas companies in more traditional sectors typically have had pain points, often associated with digitalization, and they bring in startups to help address them. And then in terms of the interfaces, you have cohorts like Microsoft, like accelerators. And we have two experts here on accelerators, which have these groups of startups coming together. And so there's a peer effect as well. They not only learn by being part of the program, but they also learn from each other and may be able to engage with each other as well. Whereas the funnel-based approach tends to be much more focused on fulfilling certain objectives, and startups get screened out as you go along. So I think both Zach and Sheelpa have very much of a cohort-based approach, Microsoft Accelerator and Infinity Lab. But there are other companies from similar industries. SAP, for example, went with their startup focus, involved startups applying with their prototype designs, which would be screened by a group of German engineers in Germany. 40% would then make the cut, and then these would be further screened by the sales and marketing team, and in the end, 10 to 15% of the startups would get go-to-market support. They wouldn't necessarily engage with each other. And BMW Startup Garage also had a very similar kind of funnel-based approach. Funnels are good for more predictable outcomes. Cohorts can actually facilitate serendipity. You could, in theory, have a three-way partnership where two startups that didn't know each other from Adam form a three-way partnership. And one of the interesting things about the Infinity Lab I noticed was that corporate innovation teams were also encouraged to use the space, and then there were some informal interactions as well with startups, and you never know what that could lead to. But also it's important for these companies to develop capabilities to embed them, and this is where it's important to go beyond initiation, which is where entrepreneurial individuals are important to make things happen, but also expanding these by galvanizing support and buy-in from other leaders and peers, and then of course consolidating and aligning these with the core strategy. And here I think Sheelpa has done exemplary work, as has Zach, in terms of spanning boundaries within the organization, because often I find that once the startups understand that a big company is serious about engaging with them, they're only too happy to at least initiate a conversation. Getting buy-in on the inside can sometimes be the tougher part. And companies like Microsoft have actually spent a lot of time and effort, and Zach was a big part of this process, and of course have leveraged different parts of the world. And so I think that's another important thing to bear in mind, which I won't get into now in the interest of time, but there's also the opportunity to tap into startup ecosystems around the world. And so with that very brief overview to sort of set the stage, let me now hand you to Sheelpa to share some thoughts, and after Sheelpa, Zach.
Thank you, Shameen. So as Shameen alluded to in his presentation, Infinity Lab and my experiences were very much based around the cohort model, and specifically based around solving problems and looking at pain points within the organization and bringing in startups to help us solve those problems. So I guess if I was to explain and summarize how I did that successfully, when setting out to create Infinity Lab, it did begin as a pilot. And I think our expectations were never that the program would have reached the lengths it ultimately did. But I think expectation management is really critical internally when you set out on something that is so new for the organization, and setting a very, very clear objective clearly around what the accelerator is there to achieve, what Infinity wanted to get out of the program and the startup collaboration, but equally clearly defining the value for the startup for coming and joining our accelerator. Now, when I joined, when I set up Infinity Lab, we were the first to do this. So we really didn't have a problem attracting startups to come and join our program. Obviously, the landscape is very different today, and it's highly competitive. And I think what is even more important right now is what is that value for the startup, but making sure you're helping the startup to make the right decision about joining the right accelerator. My purpose is all about helping the entrepreneur to succeed. And when you're running a program like this out of a corporate organization, you really do need to remove yourself from what's in it for the company versus really what's in it for the entrepreneur. And if you can put the entrepreneur's purpose at the heart of what you're doing, you will truly be successful. Having said that, I think the clear objectives around solving problems for Nissan, it was being able to bring in technology and to be able to launch new products and take innovation to market much faster. Clearly, there are internal teams that are already responsible for these areas. So there is a huge degree of sensitivity when setting out to create a program that essentially duplicates an internal function. So the way that the program is positioned and messaged and the language that you use is extremely, extremely important. Now, again, I'm a marketeer by training, so for me, communications comes very naturally. But I think that the bulk of corporate innovators do not tend to sit in marketing divisions. So I was a bit of an anomaly. So I would also advise that you really garner the support of your marketing teams and especially your internal comms experts, because how this is positioned internally from the executive level down to really every level of the organization is really critical. And establishing, again, what's in it for them. So I talked about what's in it for the entrepreneur, but really thinking about what's in it for the executive team down to a manager within the organization, and clearly messaging that so that everyone that you recruit to be part of this initiative as your ambassadors, as your doers, as really your team members to make this happen, that they're really clear on what's in it for them and that you make them realize the value they're giving. I always remember something that one of my colleagues told me. So when I first launched Infinity Lab, I approached a product marketing senior manager to be a mentor. What we did, I think, at Infinity incredibly well was we were very, very careful about how we matched mentors. We actually introduced like a speed dating type session for when the startups arrived in Hong Kong or Singapore or any of our other locations. And we injected a lot of fun and social activity behind this so that it really became something very engaging, super fun, super exciting, and really was a way for the startup and the mentor not just to match capability, but match character and match mindset as well. And this one senior manager said to me, Sheelpa, I'd love to be involved as a mentor. She said, but what can I possibly share with these startups? And I'm looking at this girl and she's one of the most experienced product marketing managers I know at Nissan. And I said, you have no idea how much knowledge you have that this startup with this particular technology, they could never learn that. And I said, I made her realize the value that she was going to bring to the table. And she thrived off it. She was buzzing. I mean, she was only meant to be in the sessions once a week. She came into the lab every single day because the energy and the appreciation and the reward that she felt was like nothing else she got in her daily job. And the Infinity Lab, I mean, if you read Shameen's book, you'll discover a bit more about my experiences. But the Infinity Lab for us turned out to be an incredible tool for internal engagement. It ended up being the most successful internal engagement tool that we had that measured the highest levels of reward. So I'll leave it at that and just see if there are any questions.
Wow, that was just fantastic, Sheelpa, and very, very helpful to have these examples as well. Zach, over to you now for your opening remarks, and then we'll hand it back to Olivia to moderate the Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Shameen. And I agree with so many things that Sheelpa said, but I'll also mention a few areas I think that we may do things a bit differently. So I rejoined Microsoft back in 2010. Microsoft used to be the evil empire, right? No one wanted to get close to Microsoft. When one of my first meetings with a VC here, I told him what I'm going to do. I'm going to build this accelerator. And he said two things. He said, not a single entrepreneur's right mind would want to join a Microsoft program. And second, if they're going to join it, we're not going to invest in them because they're idiots. That's the way we started, right? So everyone were pretty much against it because that's where we were. And I was walking around with a blog post of Paul Graham. So Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator. You can still find that blog post on his private blog. He had a post that was titled "Microsoft is Dead," and he said, "Microsoft is dead. Microsoft used to shed a big shadow on the tech world. Haven't realized when the shadow disappeared." And the third thing he said, "I don't invite them anymore to my demo days." So I basically took that blog post and went to Satya, with the head of our server and tool division, and said, Saki, Black over internet, it says we're dead. And we really need to reinvent ourselves when it comes to connecting to startups and engaging with that audience, and basically asked us permission to start this little program that was the Microsoft Accelerator that then built a pretty large program around the world. So Bangalore, Beijing, Shanghai, Berlin, London, Paris, Seattle, Sydney, and Tel Aviv, 800 startups raised more than $6 billion, 100 exits, 10 IPOs. So in my first pitch to Satya, I said, there are 4 things I'm trying to solve for. First of all, make us relevant again, make us part of the conversation, because we kind of lost the conversation. And as Sheelpa said very, very precisely, the conversation is mostly about them, not about us. The conversation is about what's interesting, what's happening. And it's not about our product. It's not about what we're trying to sell to the world. It's about the problems that these startups are trying to solve, right? So how do we make ourselves part of that conversation and make ourselves super, super valuable? And when we'll talk about what you optimize for, we can talk about what does it mean to be valuable versus what the corporate really wants from us. So first thing was, how do we make ourselves relevant? The second, how do we build long-term trust in a relationship? The challenge that we have in a lot of these corporates is we have these credit programs, right? So Microsoft had BizPark. So my team had BizPark. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars a year on credits. And Amazon has their credits and Google has their credits. And in a sense, these credits are kind of Groupon coupons. You get one and then you move to another restaurant. And then you move to another restaurant. There's not much of a relationship being built with these credits alone. They're great tools, but it's not enough. So how to build that long-term trust and relationship? And with startups, it's actually fairly easy. If you connect early and you create value, they're going to remember that when they're successful. One of our early startups, a company called AppsFlyer, I had them when they were pre-seed, 3 founders, actually 2 before they got married, but the 3 founders at their pre-seed, now they're a pretty large unicorn. And when they raised their last round of $220 million, they got this big flower bouquet saying, we couldn't have done it without you, right? And that's because of the work we did at the accelerator super early on. And 2 of their advisors today were mentors I connected them with when they've started, right? So build long-term trust and relationship is the second thing. The third thing is building future business. We're not, again, all of us are working for business corporations, right? So at the end of the day, it has to translate into a business value, but it's not the first thing it does. It actually comes as an outcome to the right engagement models. How do you build a future business with these super fast growing companies? And the last thing, Microsoft went at that time from a packaged software company to a services company. Now, we needed feedback as fast as we can from these fast-moving companies. So we've created these direct channels between our startups and engineering to drive super fast feedback into engineering and build that into the product. So I would say a few things. First of all, and by the way, Intel is very, very similar. Bob Swan, the former CEO of Intel, asked me to join because he felt that we have a challenge with connecting to startups. That the company is not learning enough, is not connected enough with these disruptors and need to do the change. And we're carrying it through now with Pat and the new management of Intel. So I would say 3 things, and connecting here to what Sheelpa said earlier. Really, really big issue is what do you optimize for with these programs? Then it's first about the startup engagement programs. If it's not first about them, nothing is going to happen. But if the startups are going to be successful, the corporate is going to get so much and so many more. But you have to be about the startups first, which is not easy for corporates to think this way. Second, even after I left Microsoft, I did consulting to Google and to some other countries. I always said there are 3 things that need to happen for these programs to be successful. 1, it has to be staffed properly. All of my Ignite pods around the world are staffed by serial entrepreneurs. So the managing director is always a serial entrepreneur, someone that thinks founder first, corporate second, right? And understands what does it mean to get your term sheet pulled away in this last second? What does it mean when your biggest customer didn't convert eventually, and he was the basis for your last funding. So so how do you staff it? It has to be funded properly. It's not a hobby. And many times these are, let's get some sponsors, let's get some people in to pay for the program. No, it has to be funded properly. And the last thing, it has to be sponsored properly, and sponsored either by the CEO, so the number one person of the company, which Satya was my sponsor, then Scott Guthrie at Microsoft, and then at Intel, it was Bob Swan, the former CEO, now Greg Lavender, which is the CTO of Intel, it's number two basically at Intel. So if not the CEO, someone on level two. And I'm not sure if I heard Sheelpa right on that, but you need to be careful not to be branded as a marketing program or as a CSR program. If you end up being branded as a marketing program or CSR, I'm not sure for how long can the program survive. These are just kind of a few, I think, high level remarks. What else? When you talk about what to optimize for, it's critical to say what you're not, right? And for me, it was very important to explain, I'm not driving revenues for the company. This is not the biz dev engine of the company. It's not IRR. We do have a venture fund, both at Microsoft and both at Intel, and I'm not driving acquisitions. There are lots of other things we've decided, we have strict OKRs, what to deliver, but we also said what we do not deliver. Anyways, waiting for the discussion and for questions. So thanks, Shameen.
Thank you, Zach. And I think Sheelpa was referring to her own expertise in marketing, which helped her to be an effective communicator, right? And that one of the byproducts was also internal engagement. But I think in terms of driving for actual results, I think both of you are pretty aligned. Olivia, back to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. There's so much we can dive into there. We've got quite a few questions coming into the chat. So what I'll do is I'll kick off with a couple of those, and then anyone else start to, post your questions in there. If you feel like you want to share directly, just let me know in the chat. Let's kick off with one of the first questions, which was always an interesting question and can be applied to so many areas within corporate innovation. But how can you overcome that? The sort of the feeling or that not invented here syndrome. So over to you, to Zach or Sheelpa, to talk a little bit about this.
Sheelpa, do you want to start?
Sure. So in terms of a not invented here syndrome, I guess you have to approach these collaborations as partnerships, though. I mean, this is about collaboration. This is about taking the best of the best from each camps. So not invented here syndrome, I'm referring to a startup bringing a technology or a product to a business that the company did not invent. It's about how the company makes that better. It's about how the company integrates the best that it's got to be able to actually co-develop, and I would say co-invent. And I think the whole nature of a startup accelerator is that it is collaborative. You start here, you end there, and there is always a different outcome at the end. So again, I think it's mindset and how you approach something, and collaboration is key.
Yeah, I agree, and it's one of the biggest challenges. One of the biggest challenges for a couple of things. First of all, and actually in Intel is even more extreme than Microsoft, because many people have been here for 25 years, 30 years, right? There are these lifers, and they've seen everything, they've done everything, they've seen it before, they've seen it fail. There's all these stories all the time, right? And it's tough, and especially when you bring people to selection day and they see early stage startups, they usually question the product, they question the technology, they don't believe it's going to be successful, and guess what? Most of them are successful, or the ones that we went through. But one of the tricks, one of the ways that we figured out a way to go around that NIH approach, and again, working better for me here at Intel than it used to work for me at Microsoft, was through this mentor network. So today we have 180 mentors internally at Intel. And the funny thing is, if we would have come with these startups and tried to sell their technology into Intel, no one would buy because they're too early, they're not, we've done different things, we're better, etc. But when you bring these people on as mentors and they come to give their expert advice and they're super smart and they're helping the startup, then almost always the question is, hey, why wouldn't we try it ourselves? Why wouldn't we integrate it in? Because they come as now part of the solution and they're not being sold to, right? So we're today at the rate of about 30% of the startups are, and these are very early stage startups, 30% of the startups in our program today are actually having POCs within Intel, which is much more than I expected. And it's great to see. And most of it is by this internal selling, right? There's a mentor, the mentor thinks this is super interesting, let's try it ourselves. So that's just one of these tricks to help integrate in and avoid that, seller-buyer tension.
Brilliant, amazing. Some really interesting questions. And before I pose a slightly different one, there's one that's come in as a sort of follow-up question to this, based on some of your answers of how do you make sure that mentors have sort of sufficient capacity to take part? How do you incentivize that in the right way?
I think so that is a challenge, because I think, especially at the start of running these types of programs, a mentor will come in and do this above and beyond their day job. So I think it does become a challenge. And that's when, I think as your program grows and there is the appetite and the buy-in to make it broader, and needing more mentors and more of their time to make this a success, we actually proposed to the executive team that taking part as a mentor in such an accelerator should be included in an individual's goal plan. And again, listing outcomes, development opportunities that individual would receive through the mentoring process. So I think your sort of ultimate point of arrival is making it part of your development plan and a goal plan. It's challenging to get there. That's where, again, winning over the right stakeholders internally, and particularly working with HR teams to be able to embed that from sort of the people level is really important. And then outside of that, again, I do keep coming back to mindset, passion, purpose. If someone truly believes in an entrepreneur and their idea and the potential they have to change the world or transform the business through it, I think passion is always key to for anyone to go above and beyond and spend the time that they need to do. But equally in a corporate environment, fully recognize it can always be a challenge.
Brilliant, amazing. Zach, do you have anything to add to that, or should we?
Yeah, so I'm always positively surprised how much time people are willing to put in as mentors. Hours and hours on a weekly basis, although some of the most busiest people, because it's this super exciting, high passion, and makes them aware of things. Now, the other thing, because the program is sponsored by the executive team, we give mentors the opportunity to actually present the startup, the outcomes, the learnings to the executive. So they get more opportunities to shine. And they always talk about these cool new things happening out there. So there are the heroes on the outside, there are the heroes on the inside. And as most of these companies today, and you talk about Microsoft and Intel as well as others, are in this kind of reinvention from a culture perspective. They're trying to re-energize the company. So Satya came with this whole growth mindset, right? And this fit really, really well in the growth mindset approach. And Bob and now Pat similarly getting the geek back and being a software-led company now with Intel, et cetera. So it all fits really well into the new culture. We've created a program at Intel for our mentors that's called Guru, which basically supposed to create Intelpreneurs, right? So how do we make more entrepreneurial, give more entrepreneurial skills to these lifer Intel people that are trying to learn what does growth mindset and customer obsession, what it all means. So we bring the accelerator as kind of a gym to exercise these concepts. Mm-hmm. So it for actually, I'm super, super surprised to see how many are lining up to support. Not all of them fit, by the way, to support as mentors of startups. There are some gaps there as well.
Brilliant. Amazing. Nice. And I think not too dissimilar, because I think actually sort of some of these challenges sort of, I guess, overlap in that way. One of the questions that's been posed in a couple of different ways actually within the chat is how can you cut through the red tape to quickly engage with startups? And I think importantly, sort of within that, how do you ensure that sort of startup mentality and momentum doesn't get lost along the way because of the red tape?
I mean, I think that was actually my biggest challenge I found. So following a successful demo day, following the commitment to POCs, you know, the process, once all the excitement has died down, and once, you know, you are trying to navigate the startup through that bureaucracy, it really is challenging. And I think that's where it comes down to the relationship that you have built with that startup, the relationship that the team has built with the startup throughout the process. I mean, I think Zach quite rightly mentioned that the team that you build to manage these programs is so important, and having a serial entrepreneur who is the managing director of a program and that gets the mindset and the importance of every meeting and every decision that happens and the impact that it has on the entrepreneur, especially the impact when the meetings get cancelled. I mean, I would spend weekends, I would spend late nights with certain entrepreneurs, you know, talking to them and trying to really coach them through the process, because being able to explain to them the bureaucracy, which I think they just don't get, is really difficult. And actually, I think, again, it's time investment, and it's having that relationship with the entrepreneurs and trying to educate them through that.
Brilliant, thanks.
I think to cut through the red tape, one of the critical things, what I mentioned earlier, is who sponsors your program. And it's really important that executive will get the strategic value of what you're doing, because people in sales always come and say, look, the amount of money that we're paying to build your program, give it to me. I'm actually going to make bigger sales from that, you know, from these dollars invested. And people in engineering will say, you know, can hire a few more architects and drive more products. Why are we doing what you're doing? So it really goes back to that sponsorship, and that sponsorship goes a long way, because it many times bring the programs front and center. And if it was Bob that put it on one of his six in all hands meeting with all of the company, 110,000 people, and brought Ignite expansion as one of the top 6 achievements or things that he's trying to do, or if it's now Greg Lavender, which is the CTO of Intel, which just lately did his all hands with his 12,000 people and talked about this little sliver, this tiny organization out of his organization, which is small but has a huge impact on the company. So this goes a long way. And by the way, one of the things we're really good at, and the rest of the Intel not as good at, the rest of the company, is like swag, because we work with startups. So we're all, and lots of other stuff. And to see these executives and says, if any one of you people watching wants this kind of t-shirt, bring a great startup to Zach. So that's there's all kind of things we play with, because we're the kind of the people outside that deal with the crazy startups. So, but the sponsorship is critical.
And I'd love to just add to that point around executive sponsorship. At the beginning of the session, I talked about objectives and, you know, making different stakeholders across the organization realize the value in the accelerator program for them. So, I mean, spanning internal boundaries is a topic addressed in Shameen's book, actually, in which Shameen and I often discuss. But this spanning of boundaries and being able to transcend silos is the beauty and the value of corporate accelerator programs. So, you know, positioning the accelerator as boundary spanning and setting out at the executive team level, whether it's marketing, whether it's product, whether it's finance, whether it's technology, whoever that stakeholder is, within the objectives and the plan behind the accelerator, that there is an objective and an outcome of value to every single person at that table at the outset, means that each executive team member is invested in the program and it is relevant to them, and that they achieve an outcome through it. Maintaining that momentum means having a seat at the table at the executive team. And if you don't have a seat at the table, making sure your boss does, which was the case at Infinity for me. And as Zach also alluded to, then if you've got the top and the bottom approach, there's almost no escaping it, because then it really becomes, you know, a priority during these executive sessions. And then coming back to the goal-based discussion, whatever can then become embedded in the organization from a goal perspective, even if it's just from the mentor participation, makes it almost intrinsic to the running of the organization. And I noticed a question in the chat where you were successful with adding this to individuals' goal plans. That comes with maturity of the program. Of course, within year one, you'll never be able to achieve that. But once you run a few successful programs and you build that brand equity and that trust in what you're doing and having that continued support, I mean, I would say by within years 2 to 3 was where we were at, where we were able to start introducing that into individuals' goal plans. So it just takes time.
Brilliant, amazing. Such a juicy topic to dive into. We have about 5 minutes left, and I'm just going to wrap up in the final couple of minutes. What I might say, Shameen, do you have anything to add based on what Sheelpa or Zach have been talking about when it comes to the sort of not invented here syndrome or that red tape? Anything that you'd like to share before we close up?
It's been fascinating to hear both Sheelpa and Zach share their experiences. And what this reinforces in my mind is, you know, although we talk about corporates and startups partnering together, in the end, it's about the people. And what you see are basically 2 examples of very skillful individuals who have had to work with multiple other individuals. And I think the real challenge that I observe in making this work is more about grappling with these people issues. And that means that we're dealing with something that is inherently difficult. There are no easy answers. And here I think some level of, I don't know, whether it's diplomacy or the ability to persuade. I think persuasion becomes extremely important, and perseverance as well. Because I think it's very difficult to be that bridge, the individual who is trying to bridge across to the startups and then dealing with people on the inside, and that too at multiple levels. And I think what we've heard from both Zach and Sheelpa, it's really about individuals getting stuck in, recognizing that what they're taking on is actually not very easy. And that to me is one of the most important things to remember. This on paper, it sounds so good that you have these big companies with scale and these startups with agility. That's a marriage made in heaven. But the difficulty really comes down, I think, to what it takes in terms of dealing with the people issues. And so I think really what I would say is when you deal with these issues around NIH or resistance, this is par for the course. I think that's something to recognize. And hopefully these various insights that you've heard from Zach and Sheelpa give you, first of all, encouragement to keep going at it, but also some insight into some of the things to try, because it's about managing across different levels, getting air cover from the top, getting bottom-up support. And I mean, it ain't easy. But as you can see in these individuals, when it's worked out, I think the payoff has been very valuable all round.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for summarising that as well. That's been brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for the session, and thank you for joining us. And of course, thank you for the questions that have come in. We haven't been able to get through all of them. There's some really interesting questions around, examples of two gorillas partnering with startups, or what the right operating model is when it comes to connecting with the mothership. All of those questions, if you can jump onto the platform that's been shared in the chat and feel free to continue those. And please do share your insights from this session with your peers in the social discussions. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to add them there as well. Thank you so much for our panelists as well, Zach, Sheelpa, Shameen. Thank you for the discussion. It's been absolutely brilliant. And again, thank you for everyone joining. Have a brilliant rest of your day. And hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.